Hey Tekken players, I hope you're all doing well. So this video is going to be a little bit of a ramble and discussion. I haven't scripted it, but I do have notes which will hopefully keep me on track. And basically we're going to talk about the Tekken 8 beta, which I had a good chance to play through this weekend. A big thank you to my better half, who basically gave me the weekend off parenting, so that was nice. So I managed to play for a lot of the weekend. And I'm just going to share my thoughts. The basic structure of this video is going to be my thoughts about the game in general, and then as a King main I'll talk a little bit about my thoughts about King as the character and the changes. I'm not going to be talking about other characters or the balance of the game, because to be honest I just haven't had a chance to lab or anything like that, and there's far wiser, more intelligent boys and girls who will be doing those sorts of videos, and you know, we'll find out in the fullness of time just who's strong, who's weak, and all the rest of it. And then finally I'm just going to talk about some changes I would like to see before we get to the main game, which I'll feed back on the forum. You may want to do the same depending if you played the beta, or you may have other changes, so just a few things like that. So before we begin, just a bit of context for those of you who might be new to this channel. My name is Beige Master. I, like a lot of people, first started playing Tekken back on PlayStation, Tekken 1, 2 and 3. However, Tekken 7 was the first time, coming back to it as an old man, that I really started to take it seriously and start to try to understand the game at a more fundamental level. And for the past sort of few years, I've managed to get most of my mains up to Fujin on PC, you know, making that what you will in terms of, you know, in terms of skill level. But the real thing I've been proud about is creating this YouTube channel to help new players, you know, learn the game. So that just gives you some context in terms of where I'm coming from. I'm not an amazing player, I'm not a complete Tekken nerd, but I've got a few, you know, rough idea, and I like to sort of try and keep my thoughts relative to average player, shall we say, a bit like myself. So anyway, let's talk about the game, and let's get the positives out of the way first. First of all, this game looks, as in Tekken 8, this game looks absolutely gorgeous. If you've only seen footage of it and it's from Twitch streams or YouTube, it does not do it justice. Unfortunately, it could be because the person playing it hasn't, you know, has had to dial back the effects, or more likely because when you stream to Twitch the bitrate can't cope basically, and it gets compressed with all the particle effects. Basically it does not do it justice. When you sit here and you play it, in my case in 1440p ultra wide, everything maxed out, it looks really good. I've done a benchmark on my channel looking at the 4070, so I've tried my best to give you an idea of the visual representation of what it looks like. But yeah, looks brilliant. Devs have done a really good job. Now, considering how good it looks, and despite what you may or may not read on the darker corners of Tekken Reddit, sorry guys, but you know, just gotta say it how it is, this game is pretty well optimized. Now, people will say, oh well, I can't run it, and then you find out they're basically trying to play the game on a Pentium Celeron with onboard graphics. Considering this game is a next gen Unreal Engine 5, it honestly, it runs really well. Again, I've got a video to a benchmark which I'll upload, where basically I tested it on my little 1660 Super graphics card, which is a card that's what, 4 generations old, you know, it's 3 or 4 years, I can't remember exactly. Only 6 gigabytes of VRAM, you know, we're talking really mediocre stuff, and I could still play it at 1080p on high settings at 60 FPS the entire time. You know, that's pretty, for a current game, that's astonishing. It can run on that. If you know, just look at Starfield, look at Last of Us Part 1 when that first came out. If you want to see what bad optimization looks like, this game runs really fine. Yes, if you're running the minimum specs like a 1050 Ti, you might have to buy some new hardware, but you know, that is life. The game itself is going to cost what, £60 or thereabouts, so the game's not cheap. You might as well treat yourself to some good hardware to play it on. But honestly, don't listen to what a lot of people say. It runs really well. I think where people are getting, you know, upset, and I'll get to this later in terms of the things I'd like to change, is actually to do with how well it runs when you're in a match playing another opponent who might not be on very good hardware or on a bad connection. But as I said, we'll get to that later. Some other things I love, just some little quality of life things. you can skip outros. You can obviously skip your own intro, you can't skip your opponents, but you can skip their outro. That is brilliant. I mean, I cannot stress enough how great that is to not have to see Brian's stupid face like as he punches your corpse, or or whatever sort of stupid like outro that we've all seen a million times that the person just for some reason has to watch. You can just skip it. It's brilliant. I love that. 10 out of 10. Well done. Wish you could skip their intro as well, but I understand why that's not the case. Second thing, instant rematching with the best of 3. Again, brilliant. No need to sit there hearing the announcer say get ready for the next battle while everything recomposes. It's just instantaneous, back into the rematch. That's brilliant. Another feature I love, the frame data is now free. It's not a DLC feature. That's really, really good, and that's really good for new players who want to sort of take the first baby steps into understanding this game as a whole. Being able to see something as basic as frames is fantastic that's built in. So again, big thumbs up, well done Bandai Namco for that. And the final thing, I wasn't really sure about the first of 3 and how I'd feel about it, but I think on balance, in ranked, I think it's a pretty good compromise. People can still, and I'm a bit upset about this, people can still do the classic one and done. So they can still just play once and then leave. And so they're not forced to do a first to 3. I don't really know how you could get around that. The only thing I could think of would be perhaps if there's somehow an incentive to play first to 3. So I don't know, for example, if you win the second match you get double the points like for ranked. Or for the sake of argument, if you play a second match and you lose, you don't lose the points you gained. Something like that, I don't know. But it would be nice to have some kind of incentive, because it's great to have the first to 3, but you're still going to get people who will just turn up, they play like an absolute mad woman or madman, whatever, they just go completely bananas, and you've no idea what the hell's going on, you can't download them, and then they bugger off basically, and that's it, GG's. Which is really, really frustrating, and it's a tactic that people do now. But I don't know how you get around that, but that's something. But as I say, the first to 3 setup I do quite enjoy. I like the fact that you know where you stand. If you take 2 losses, you only take 2 losses, to be honest, and you fight the next person. You stop getting into this sort of horrible death cycle, should we say, where you're like, oh, I'm sure if I keep rematching I'll win, and you just end up kind of on a constant loss. Apparently, I didn't do any quick matches, but apparently it's the same in quick match, which to me makes no sense. Like, why would you do a first to 3 in quick match? If you're in a quick match, play as long as you want, but maybe that will change in the main. I don't know. So that's how I feel about the game in general. Really, really positive. I've got some other things to say later, but that's my general thoughts. Now, in terms of the mechanics, so getting into the kind of slightly more nerdy stuff now, rather than the game in general, in terms of my thoughts. So it's interesting. Sidesteps, I was told, were really, really buffed for Tekken 8, and I've got mixed feelings about it. I would say, and again, this is just my experience. It could be that someone's got a different one. I can only go by what I found as I was testing it. So sidesteps when you're up close are definitely buffed. They're really, really good. So for example, even playing King, who's a big boy, especially in Tekken 8, he's bloody huge. You can do a simple 2-1 jab string into sidestep, and you'll basically sidewalk anything that the opponent throws out, unless it's a specific homing move. It's really good, so you don't get clipped. So it kind of makes that sort of close quarters Tekken a bit more interesting, because you can sort of, you can constantly dance around and try to play, on the 3D level. So that being said, so that's great. The thing I found was actually at distance, I found that side walking was actually a lot harder to do, and lots of things which, lots of while running moves. For example, I can't pronounce her name, but the new character, Azensa, however you say it, no matter what I did, I tried to walk that move, it would always clip me. And there's also seems to be a lot of strings, mainly from Jin, and he's got history of this, where even if you start side walking the entire string, somehow it just completely tracks you. It goes 360. And I joke about that, but you try side walking in Tekken 7, his rage drive kind of string that he does. Doesn't matter what you do, it will auto align, and I've seen it literally go almost 180 degrees. And there seems to be a lot more of that going on in Tekken 8. Now again, that could be that's just sort of how it is now, and it might change. It could be that I just haven't didn't crack the timing of walking at distance, but it just seemed to me that when you're further away, it was nigh impossible in a lot of cases to sort of avoid those while running attacks, which is a bit bad considering that while running is now much easier to do in Tekken 8. You don't have to do instant while running, you can do it sort of pretty close. So that's just what I found. Again, again, just for the record, I mainly played King because he's my main, and I also dabbled with Paul for a bit. I both got them up to warrior rank. I didn't play anyone else because I didn't have that much time. So they're both fairly big boys, but at close quarters it was really easy to basically sidestep, confirm, down 4-2 or hop kick, which was great. But at distance, just kept getting smashed by whatever while running move that, you know, Raven or what's her face were throwing at you. Again, that's just my experience. I can just share what I saw. The other thing, which we knew was going to happen, but the lack of having a fast counter hit move that you can throw out, I find that really, it's going to take a while to get used to, but I find that really troublesome for me, because generally speaking, when I play most of my characters, I tend to try to sort of step back and then play a keep out. So anything that comes in, if I'm playing King, I can do back one, and as long as it hasn't got any high crush, it will clip them, and then it's a great way of keeping opponents away, or, you know, or whatever. Now that just isn't there in Tekken 8. You've got to sort of, you know, you've got to just accept the fact that this person, if they want to get in, they're just going to come charging at you. That's a bit of a, you know, it's a game change, literally, and I'm sure we'll get used to it, but that's just something that I found hard to get used to. So the other thing I noticed in terms of general mechanics, I noticed that any move where you're airborne, so classic example is King's Capital Punishment, which for some reason they changed it up 1+2. I don't know why either, but there we are. Or Paul's Trooper Roll, his forward 4. Even King's down back 4, if I've got that correct, which is the one where there's sort of the jumping drop kick. Anything where you're airborne, it doesn't seem to matter what move the opponent does, anything will clip you and will float you. Whereas before, you kind of only really could sort of get some with a jab. Whereas now, more or less anything was floating you if you were airborne. So again, that's just something to bear in mind. So it kind of like you're slightly limited in terms of your options. I noticed it far more with Paul actually compared to King, but again, it's just an observation. The floats don't give you a huge amount of damage because of the scaling, but it's just something that I've noticed. What else did I find? Oh, let's talk about heat. So I found the heat mechanic interesting, shall we say, and I like the idea of it to an extent. I think it would be better, they're not going to change this, it's too fundamental, but someone suggested that you shouldn't start the round with heat, that it should be like immediately build up, and I think I agree to an extent. I think that would make it more interesting in terms of the mind games. It's a bit odd that you've sort of got access to it straight away. And again, I can only speak from the experience of playing Paul and King. It could be that other characters have more interesting sort of heat mechanics, but I found that I didn't. It's kind of nice to have it there, but I didn't really sort of get too much of a chance to kind of explore how it works. Not with Paul. With King, I had a bit more fun. So, for example, it was very fun just going into heat and then being able to have access to an unblockable RKO with armor. That's pretty awesome. And a mid to sort of mix that up. And it was kind of cool the fact that when you went into heat with King, that actually if you landed throws, you could recharge it. That was nice. It kind of gives you an incentive to start throwing the opponent like mad. Now in terms of, so that's when you have heat. Now in terms of when you're playing against people who are in heat, when you play a Hoang in heat and your back's against the wall, then God help you, that's pretty damn terrifying. Could not move, couldn't do anything, could barely, really hard to even step out to that because so much of his heat moves seem to leave him at plus 4 or 5, which makes stepping really difficult. To an extent, it's the same with Jin. He seemed to have a lot of sort of really obnoxious strings once he was in heat, and you never really know when they were going to finish. So, but that could just be matchup knowledge, and once it's out properly and had time to lab, then we'll get a better idea. So, generally speaking, I was pretty happy with it, but as I mentioned at the start, I would suggest listening to the real sort of experts and really character-specific guys to kind of get an idea of how well the heat works and how to deal with it and all that sort of stuff. So that's my thoughts about the mechanics of the game. So let's talk about a little bit of the character that I do know, which is King. So let's talk about some of his stuff in Tekken 8, some of the changes. Generally speaking, King is really fun. I mean, I've always found him quite, well, there's a reason why he's my main. I've always found him fun to play, but I think he's even more fun in this. I like the fact that, that they play to the character and just say, no, he's a big boy. You can just smash through stuff if you need to. And he hits like a truck. His combo damage, I'll go into this a bit later, but to be fair, I think compared to some of the others, they seem to hit pretty hard. Just for an example, compared to Paul's combo, so it could be that I just didn't unlock the absolute optimal version, but let's say if you block a -15 low, with Paul you do while standing 2. At best with no wall you've got about 64, 65 damage. With King, with again no walls, you were landing about 74. So he hits pretty hard, especially compared to a character like Paul who you always associate with massive damage. So that's pretty cool. All I did find, as I mentioned at the start, I found a lack of keep out was quite annoying, but that's just my playstyle. That said, the push was still pretty damn good. It has been nerfed slightly because the damage is scaled if you land a counter hit, but it's still a really good way to sort of stop people from mashing, and it's kind of the closest thing I think King has to a panic tool if you really want to condition the opponent to either stop ducking or stop pressing buttons. Speaking of ducking, because obviously people love to duck King because they're terrified of throws, having unbreakable crouch throws is really cool, and it's a really nice addition. I love that. They are, if you've thrown them out and they're not ducking, they do have a reasonably large sort of whiff sort of window, but no one really punished me particularly hard for doing it. So they're really good to have for people who just like to sort of, let's say a classic case, you land the back 1-2, you're at decent amounts of plus frames. People think you're going to throw out a giant swing, so they duck. So what do? They duck and you smash them with a pedigree and then you get heat. That was really fun, and that's a really nice fact to have, because you can do that in Tekken 7, but then it's a 50-50. They can break them with either 1 or 2. Whereas now, nope, if you duck, you're committed, and if you get hit by the throw, tough, you got to take it. So that's pretty cool. The other sort of changes I noticed with King, the hurt box for when he goes into Jaguar Step, that's Jaguar Step, not Jaguar, because we're not from the States. Anyway, the hurt box on Jag Step seems to be really big. So I tend to, in Tekken 7, it's a nice little round start to just do a backwards Jaguar Step, because you can evade, see if they've whiffed, and then boom, hit them with a forward 2-1. However, the amount of times I tried to do this and just got clipped by pretty much anything that the other person threw out. So again, we did mention that King's a big boy, and I think they've kind of, it's a bit annoying that that's the case. It's not like Feng, who can just back Genpo and he stays blocked for reasons that I don't understand. I assume because he's Harada's main, and we've got to treat him special. But yeah, so it's a bit of annoying because King's backdash is already fairly sort of weak in Tekken 8. That's no secret. People have seen that. And you've always had the Jaguar Step as kind of like an easy mode, sort of, back away. But as I say, for me, again, just from my experience and testing, I just felt like I was getting clipped by far more moves than normal compared to Tekken 7. So that's a little bit annoying. I mentioned in terms of combos, they do really good damage, but I miss the fact that I know I'm going to sound a bit elitist here, but I miss the fact that I'm so sort of sad that the forward 1 execution is gone, and you can score that little bit extra and that little bit extra swag by doing a move that's really hard to do. Now, before, I know that sounds elitist, but to be honest, I mained King, and it took me about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years to learn that. And once I learned it, I was like, this is so cool, and this is such a nice sort of, I think Main Man sort of describes it a lot with the execution of, with a character like Law, for example. You have average sort of execution. You've got a little bit extra spice that kind of makes it like, this person really has understood this character, and you may even you may end up just sort of dropping the combo, but the fact that you've got it and you try, I think, just gives you a little bit of sort of swag factor. I mean, Jess Andy is a complete and total example of this. I love watching Jess Andy play because it doesn't matter what he's doing, he'll always go for maximum execution level, and it's amazing to watch, even if he ends up losing the match. But such a Chad for doing it anyway. And that's a bit, anyway, so going back, that's a bit of a shame that's now gone. There's a few sort of very minor sort of combo tweaks you can do if you can still do an instant Shining Wizard in for a bit of extra damage, but they're more or less gone now. That being said, it's still early days yet, and no doubt if you look up Armor King's YouTube channel, he'll no doubt show you some max damage versions where there's some sick execution involved. But yeah, it's just a bit of a shame. I miss having that forward 1 as a nice sort of combo bonus. The only thing just to mention is the wall combos, from what I've seen, still don't seem to be that great. King's never really had good wall combos. He's had his ground throws at the wall, but they can be broken, and even those have been nerfed now slightly, because to my embarrassment I thought 1-2 into ground throw was still technically possible, and I was just dropping it a lot online. But actually, if they tech roll, you can no longer do 1-2 into ground throw. You can do 1, so you can do 1 jab into the ground throw, but not 1-2. So even that now, the damage has been nerfed a little bit. That being said, I did see a video before I started recording for this of Tekken King, that's his YouTube channel, showing a demo of being able to re-wall splat. So again, I'm just saying, generally from my experience, I couldn't really sort of land any max really big damage wall combos, but there may be variants out there. But anyway, that's King as a general. He's never had a good wall game in Tekken 7. That's not really sort of got any better for Tekken 8. What else? And I suppose just the final thing to say about King is his backdash is worse than in Tekken 7. Again, that's no surprise, we've known that for a while, but his sidestep does feel a lot better, and it could just be the general buffs to sidesteps. But yes, as I mentioned, it was much easier to do a poke string and then be able to really sort of clean step a lot of the incoming BS, so that's really nice. I just wish that it worked at distance, but anyway, that could be just me. So that is a summary of King and the changes and how I feel about them. So the final thing, just to wrap this up, which is the drawbacks, because nothing's perfect, there's always going to be cons, and so I'd just like to sort of mention the problems and the changes I'd like to see. And if you want to sort of, if you've had the chance to play the beta and you're filling out your survey to feedback, you may want to take these on board. Again, I'm not going to talk about balance. No doubt there'll be lots of balance changes that need to happen. From even me as a general scrub could tell that Jin seems to be ridiculously overpowered. By far, Jin was by far the character giving me the biggest grief. Just seems to have so much extra stuff now, and just, yeah, he has so much range compared to what he had before. But that's a general point. So ignoring the balance and the changes that to characters, the biggest problem I had, and this goes back to the start when I was talking about optimization, you can be playing this game on a really, really good PC, everything, maxed out, and it will look beautiful. However, if the person you're playing against is playing on a potato, what happens is that as soon as the match starts, you'll see their little performance bar will turn red. It will stay red the entire time, and although your machine and your frame graph says you're running at 60 FPS, the game's running normally, it will look like a PowerPoint show, and that is really, really annoying. And they say it's because and they did discuss this in the CNT before, but it's if the other person's on suboptimal hardware, you both suffer. That's annoying. Now, the way that I would suggest that you deal with it, because I don't think it's fair to necessarily have a forced benchmark to stop people from playing it, because I think that's unfair, because it could be that you, as I say, you spend 60 quid or whatever it is, £60 to buy the game, thinking you'll be able to run it, and then suddenly the game tells you can't. Well, that's a bit of a douche move to be like, just to be locked out because you can't run the benchmarks. So I think a fair way of doing it would be that when you're getting paired up, at the moment you see what platform they're on, and you see if they're on Ethernet or Wi-Fi. To me, it should also state what their benchmark score is. So, in case you're not aware, when you first load the game up, it gives you a score. in typical Bandai Namco, it doesn't tell you anything in terms of what it means. But for example, mine with my sort of fairly expensive 4070, I got a benchmark of like 650 or something like that. Other people, generally speaking, seem to be saying that theirs was about 300, 350 or thereabouts, so fairly good hardware. So it could just be that you get to see that, and anything that's like below 100 or whatever could just be like, nope, I'm not accepting that match, because you know it's going to tank. And just for kind of like, just to give you a bit of anecdotal evidence of how this works, it could be that you start the match and everything seems to be running fine. And I had this with a Kaz player I was playing, and we were on the, I believe the realm, the stage is called Sanctum. It's the one that's in the cave. Again, looks gorgeous, but there's a stage change midway through where the floor collapses and you go to the lower level. As soon as that happened, again, we went from buttery smooth 60 to PowerPoint with that red bar on, I'd say, on my opponent's side, just going red. So clearly what's happened, because the stage has changed, his machine wasn't able to basically composite the shades and, you know, build the environment and all the stuff that is happening in the back end. It just didn't have time to do it. So normally at the start of the match, that's what that's what's loading in the loading screen and all the rest of it. And when it's happening in game, the hardware that he or she was running just didn't have it in it. So that, and you know, that entire round just got completely and utterly ruined. And I say, it really was like, barely moving. And it wasn't just a one-off, because I rematched because I was curious to see, would this happen again? And yes, it did. So it's that, once the machine that he or she was playing on had to reload everything, it just completely tanked. So that's annoying, and that's not fair, because it could be that you're playing, you could be, for the sake of argument, you're on a really high stress promotion or demotion. You accept the match, it says, oh yeah, 5-bar connection, great, it's going to go really well, and then boom, it absolutely tanks. And there should be some sort of preview to say whether you're going to accept that match. And it's in the interest, because a lot of console players, so people on PS5 and Xbox, were saying, well, I can't take the risk of playing someone who's going to be playing on a Raspberry Pi. I'm not going to turn the cross match on. I'm going to only accept fellow PS5 players. So that's a shame if you're on PC, because then you don't get to play across the board. Whereas if you just have that, marker, that means that if that person is playing on PS5, they can see, okay, this person's running a PC and it's got a benchmark of 350, it's going to be fine, rather than just banning or blocking out in all PC as a whole, which kind of takes away the crossplay element. That's just my thoughts, and that's the biggest change that I'd suggest they do, because then it just makes the whole thing a bit more reliable in terms of what you're accepting. So anyway, that's my ramble over. I hope that's been enlightening to you. As I say, just an average player, just some thoughts I've got. I'd love to know what you think. I'd really like to know in terms of if there's any comments you're going to be making on your feedback form. It'd be a great place to share it in the comments below. And thanks for listening to my TED talk. Any other questions about the beta I may be able to answer again, drop a comment below. And thanks guys, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.